And I'd humbly submit to you that nowhere else in the United States of America will you find a governor and a mayor, both senators and representatives, Democrats and Republicans, charter school advocates and teacher union leaders, businessmen and philanthropists, civic, faith, and community leaders, and parents, students, and citizens, all of whom are committed to finally answering the call of a nation at risk by seeing transformational instead of incremental reforms for the education of Cleveland's children.
It's now law.
We now have the legislative tools necessary to bring these models to scale, but starting new schools requires the capital needed to invest in new materials and equipment, professional training, school infrastructure, and technology, if these models are to succeed. Issue 107 allows us to deepen investments necessary to ensure that students graduate ready for a college, career, and the workforce.
On July 22nd, we will launch a citywide campaign that, to me, is as important as any political campaign you will see this election year. A campaign to get every Cleveland kid to school every day.
Get to school, you can make it.
I'm here to tell you something, and it's a very, very exciting time for me and for the board to say yes. We stand with 117 private colleges that are going to offer every student in the public school system of Cleveland, Ohio, free college tuition.
CMSD is a vastly different place than we were in 2011. Together, the momentum we are seeing from kindergarten to third grade literacy improvements, the momentum we are seeing on test scores from third grade through high school, and the momentum we are seeing on continuously increasing graduation rates earned us an overall grade of D on this year's report card, up from the F we earned last year. I want to make it clear, we are not celebrating a D. All that moving from an F to a D tells us is that we continue to move upward, but that we also have a lot more yet to achieve. I started the speech today by talking about Newton's laws, but up to now I haven't mentioned Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That law implies that our momentum can be stopped if an equal and opposite reaction is applied.
Health experts believed it was just a matter of time, and now the coronavirus is in Ohio. 3 cases in Cuyahoga County.
So we are announcing today that children of the state will have an extended spring break.
So my first memory of the pending shutdown was I was in Washington, D.C. At the time I was the chair of the Council of the Great City Schools, and I was briefing, getting ready for our March conference. And I got a call from Mayor Jackson, who said, I'm having a press conference at 1 o'clock and I'd like you to be there. And I said, well, Mayor, I'm in Washington, D.C., I can't be there. And I remember him chuckling and saying, you're still traveling? So I came home that night, and 2 days later, the governor announced that all schools were going on a 3-week spring break.
Everybody was thinking we just get an extra week off, that's an extra week of no homework, we get to just have fun and relax. And then 1 week turned into 2, 2 turned into 3, and then next thing you know, we're supposed to be having summer break.
It was a weird thing. It was a transition that I don't think anybody was ready for, because it happened so abruptly and so suddenly. But we only thought it was temporary, so we thought we could just deal with it, smoothly, just because it was going to be temporary. But when it began to be prolonged, it became like a real wake up, like, wait a minute, this is more serious than we think.
We don't know what to do when COVID-19 hit, because we didn't know what it was. So we were just like scared at home, studying, sleeping, having nothing to do. Like, we were at the lowest version of ourselves.
I have worked in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, Cleveland Public Schools, Cleveland Municipal School District for a total of 48 years as of this August. And these last 2 years since the pandemic have been by far the most challenging years of my career.
we really did start with thinking about it as an extended spring break. And so we printed a lot of materials that kids and families could pick up just to stay engaged. We opened food sites and we're running buses to deliver people to the food sites and then bring them back to the schools in their community, all kind of short-term responses. But as that 3 weeks went on, it became increasingly clear that it wasn't just going to be 3 weeks. And so I would say in hindsight, had we known that, we would have got a faster jump on it. But we immediately had to figure out how to take those short-term things and make them long-term.
Welcome, everybody. Hi. We are D M S D. It's so great to see you on this bright Monday morning. Come and learn with us. Have a great time.
Looking back at those very early days in March and April of 2020, we started with a short-term response that immediately became clear was going to be a much longer term. How do you feed people in the long term? How do you print materials and get it in the hands, which we actually ended up mailing to homes? How do you use TV and Channel 43 so that people can still be getting instruction when they don't have devices and that sort of thing? How do you get people connected in America's worst connected city, right?
Before the pandemic, I would provide a lot of support and, going to the hospitals in person, translating for parents to understand the medical care. I'm supporting with clothing and other needs. But then when the pandemic, we had to totally shift. And now we are ensuring, continue to ensure that they have food, but also internet, laptops, helping them understand. We miss you, Mary. Where do I get tested? I'm having symptoms, but I called this pharmacy and they're full. Just helping them navigate, because it was hard. It was hard for us to schedule an appointment. So, can you imagine families that, don't know the language or they're not used to, having to troubleshoot and navigate all these, difficult systems. And then some families didn't have transportation. But then you don't have, a neighbor that wants to take you because we're all isolated. So there was a lot of so many issues, during COVID that we tried to be able, be able to assist them.
Every school district in America, along with lots of other organizations, now needs to figure out how to work and learn at home. So everybody is scrambling to buy devices, tablets, laptops, hotspots. Much of that comes from China. So we were making massive buys in buying stuff that had to be shipped from China. One of the things we learned is how much freight is shipped in commercial airlines in the belly of planes that weren't flying. And so we ended up at one point having, thousands of devices that we had purchased sitting on a dock in China. We had another purchase that 10 days before it was due to arrive, we were informed by the vendor that they weren't going to fill that order at all. Not just delayed, but at all, and had to scramble to rebuy. There was that immediate shortage of the tools necessary to function in this new space. I also remember at the time, that we weren't equipped to image, literally thousands of devices. And so, I spent days at schools opening devices, loading content in, working 20 devices at a time so that we could get 36,000 devices out the door. Being at Paul Dunbar in the middle of the night imaging because school was starting tomorrow and the devices weren't ready yet,
Teachers volunteered to pass out devices to kids so that we could initially meet with them. At that point, Zoom was a new thing. A couple people had heard about it, but it wasn't the thing that everybody knew how to work. So we did some things where we played on our phones with each other, teachers. We had Zoom meetings on phones with each other to say, hey, well, this platform might be able to work. If we can meet kids here, we can do this here.
When someone told me about logging on to Teams, it was like, okay, so do we put on uniforms, or what kind of teams are we talking about here, you know? But just learning the whole, you know, the whole Schoology, the Microsoft 365 and the capabilities of it, that's definitely something that's always going to resonate with me.
Remote learning, it was hard, I should say, because it's like waking up every day and opening the computer wasn't for everybody. It's like, because you in your own home, it's like you stand in front of a game, TV, and they'd rather have you open the computer and do school. And I think nobody really into that for real.
I teach math. Math is an exact science. It's very hard to teach mathematics online or through a computer to a kid who doesn't know what one-to-one correspondence is, doesn't know what a number is. And I'm literally now charged with teaching mathematics, teaching, you know, addition facts. It's a very difficult thing. If I can't present a manipulative to a child that is struggling and they're on a computer, it makes it almost impossible for them to learn the material.
For deaf and hard of hearing students, moving to remote was a whole slew of challenges that we had to overcome. The very challenging thing for students is usually, you know, when you're in a classroom, you've got the teacher and you have the interpreter, and the student can track between the teacher and the interpreter to see, okay, I can watch their lips moving and I can see the interpreter, what they're signing, I can track back and forth, and then also see what's going on behind us, you know, so they have visual access to everything. But on Zoom, you know, if you're screen sharing, everything is taken over by that screen. And so trying to figure out, okay, do you know how to pin? Do I have to pin, you know, before spotlighting came into play? And so having to find those accessibility tools that allowed our deaf and hard of hearing students to see the screen, to have captions on the screen, to see the interpreter as, you know, that same video is happening and me being a tiny box and my hands being this small, you know. So it was very challenging visually.
Everybody had their cameras off. Like, you couldn't see nobody's faces. It was camera off or a black screen. It's just like the connections with the teachers and the students, it was not there. Or most people would be either like tired or just not engaged.
For some students, it just didn't work. The online did not work. It was too stressful for them. And I think it really affected their mental health. They had to show their rooms, how they lived. You know, some students live in a very poor neighborhood and they don't have, you know, their rooms in a way they would like to show their friends, you know. So I know it was hard. It was hard. It was hard for the families that didn't understand how to work with a computer. We had some grandparents trying to teach their kids, you know, making sure that they get their education, but they didn't know how to turn on a computer, you know. So here we are, you know, trying to make sure all the families have, you know, their basic needs like food, but also making sure that they get educated on, even, you know, grandparents. We did Zoom video conferences with the families and grandparents, just showing them, okay, this is how you turn on a computer, and this is how you know, look up, so they could ensure that their kids was, you know, still learning and still participating in the daily activities.
My two younger brothers were in middle school at that time, so we would always be like back and forth, like, hey, I'm on a Zoom call, I need you guys to be quiet. We're on different schedules. It was just yelling about that and then not wanting to wake up, so having to make sure everyone was up. And then I was automatically the tutor for everyone. And I'm like, I'm trying to focus on my own stuff and I can't help you with your 5th grade math. It was just a big mess. It was very chaotic.
I didn't realize how much energy I personally got and get from kids and learning and access until I had none. There was no standing in the back of a Zoom room, you know. My popping in became an incredible disruption. And so I found myself suddenly without a lot of kid contact. And that also meant that, you know, when our School of the Arts students did their dance around their beds in their bedroom and choreographed it, those things were so meaningful to me because I just had so many fewer of them.
Something that I can remember that was was when they were doing the state testings for the kids, which was different, was that I had some parents coming over to my house and we were setting up tables in each room because they didn't know how to log in and they were having issues. And I'm like, just come over to my house. I'll put her in one room. I'll have my kid on the other and the other one in the other room. And I thought, you know, even though we were social distancing, that kind of helped keep some of the families together, or our friendship in a way.
We would receive donations from different community partners. We had teachers volunteer their time to meet up at a specific place, and we would get the big donation and separate, let's say, okay, so we're gonna serve 50 families. Make sure that we were reaching out to those families and providing them with hygiene products, food. We also had games. We would give them games because some kids were just, you know, they would say, like, I'm so bored. You know, I can't go out, you know, I can't go to the park, I can't play the sport that I was used to playing. And it was really bringing them down. So we started like, okay, so maybe they need a board game.
We made home visits to kids who had not responded to phone calls. It was very effective because it let us know one or two things. Was there internet access at home? Could you log in? Did you live there anymore? Did you choose to go to another district in another setting because they offer in-person learning? Which we had all of those cases. And then we also found out who just wasn't logging in and was supposed to. You know, you were able to help them as well.
We saw a lot of young children that weren't able to get on to school or get on to school because of care issues. We saw middle school students who were often asked to take care of themselves at a time developmentally where you're not very self-directed, you know. We saw high school students vanish because they went to work, and it wasn't, you know, reluctant learners that had already struggled in school and they vanished. It was kids across the spectrum. You know, I remember a student on track to be a valedictorian that just stopped coming to school because the student picked up a job and needed to help their family. And so we saw all kinds of attendance disruptions in that remote and hybrid period of time.
I kind of dropped down throughout COVID, and it was like lack of motivation. I didn't feel like there was really any point because I didn't really see anything coming from it.
Friday night.
Z1079 is taking you to prom.
Live on the radio. That's right. CMSD Seniors, we're doing it just for you. It's me, DJ KY, and I want to help you have prom.
And then the questions started coming about, well, are we going to have prom? We have Senior Honor Day here where the students actually receive their scholarships on that day. So we were getting all kinds of phone calls. Are we still going to hold these events? And if not, why not? And can't we do this instead? Can you make this adjustment? Can you make that adjustment? So we were being bombarded with all kinds of suggestions as to how to pull things off despite the pandemic, all the way up to and including graduation. There were several that didn't think that we had to do a drive-through graduation. Well, this district is holding it, you know, in person, and you just let one person walk in and walk across the stage. So all of that is coming in, and we're trying to adhere to what the district is saying. No, this is what everyone is going to do, and explain that to your parents and to your students, and get them to understand that this is not something punitive that we're doing. We're trying to do the best thing that we possibly can and be as safe as we possibly can, because we don't have a clue what this virus is all about. out, and we don't need anyone getting sick and, you know, worst case scenario, dying from it. So please just bear with us and know that we'll get through this together.
You know, I remember thinking, how do we shepherd our community through this? You know, our parents and our kids and our educators. And so I remember like every message that we put out, and I was putting out videos once a week that I was recording off of a fake teleprompter that, you know, our tech team helped me turn my computer into, sitting in my upstairs den, you know. But I remember that every message had to say, it's gonna be okay, and here's what we're gonna do. Even at times when I didn't know what we were gonna do, and I didn't know if it was gonna be okay. But the message had to say, it's gonna be okay, and here's what we're gonna do.
Thank you for continuing to work closely with us to make the best of this international crisis. Please keep washing your hands, wear your face mask, and practice social distancing. It's what will make the difference in the long run. I hope that you and each of your loved ones remain safe, healthy, and well. Thank you.
Hello, CMSD and City of Cleveland educators, and welcome to the East Technical High School COVID-19 Vaccination Center. Today I'm going to walk you through the process you can expect when you get your vaccine.
As we have moved through the pandemic and navigated as best as we could, mental health concerns have heightened because it's a lot to digest. It's a lot for us as adults to digest and understand and put it in perspective. It's definitely a lot for us to expect for our scholars to do that. And so understanding how to address the feelings of isolation, how to address the feelings of self-harm, how to address the feelings of not belonging or feeling like I belong to a group, or not being able to understand how to work out a tiff or a riff with a friend, has created some anxiety with our students. And it's important that as a family support specialist, we get those needs addressed.
I felt that when we returned from being in a remote setting and coming back into an in-person setting, even though we were going hybrid, there was a certain sense of trust that I had to ensure, and not just me, but our staff community had to ensure the families that we were going to do everything possible to ensure their safety. And it was my responsibility as an administrator to ensure the staff that I was going to do everything possible to ensure their safety, because there was this huge fear people had. And we need to remember, people lost their loved ones, and there was someone that we knew that was highly impacted because of this virus, and people were fearful. So our goal was to make sure that we continue to have this community where we are ensuring the safety for our families, we are ensuring the safety for our students, for our staff, and that was our #1 priority.
So coming back to school, I was relieved and happy to see a classroom setting again, just as the kids were. Now, they might not have been socially prepared for it, but they absolutely were excited to come back to school.
It was kind of like a relief, but also like a shock, because it was like we took like another big step off of like being out of school for a long time.
Having 9th graders come to high school, knowing that their last full-time in a school setting, a formal school setting, was 6th grade, that in itself too was a challenge. I spoke to the staff prior to the school year starting and simply just reminded them that we can't expect the freshmen to come in like freshmen of old. They are going to come in acting just like they're still in middle school. And we've got to allow them some time to get that middle school blood, I call it, out of their system and get them acclimated to high school.
With my daughter was more with concern. Like she always like, but what if I get sick, Mom? So they were concerned about getting sick, going back to school. And that, as a parent, I was concerned too. But I know that it was important for them to go back to school and start to socialize again.
The kids were different. They came to school different. We had students crying, like in a crisis, and I would be like, what's going on? And they're like, my classmate doesn't want to put her mask on. You know, they were scared.
We found students walked out the classroom, they put their head down, they would put their headphones in, listen to music. They used it as a coping mechanism for stress. They were tired, they did not know how to handle the personal interaction, so they shut down. And we talked to our teachers about it, and we wanted them to see this is what they go through. That not only are they dealing with the school aspect, their home lives, their social lives, they have to relearn what it's like to be out in society again.
Some of my friends, some went to school, they were still taking it serious. And a lot of friends before I went to Adams after the pandemic, a lot of them just stopped attending high school, period, like a whole lot.
The group that came back one quarter, it was still, while we were hybrid, it was still like they were, you know, online. The few that came in, they did not interact with each other, hardly at all, even all the way up to the prom, when the seniors had the prom. We had a beautiful venue down at Windows on the River, and it was like they were total strangers.
We had students that were cutting, that they didn't know how to process what they were feeling. And those students, we were able to provide services. But when you provide a service to a student, what about the families, you know? So we also have to talk with the families and get them connected with services as well.
I think one of the most major challenges, and definitely something that was very difficult to wake up in the morning, was to see how I was going to staff all the classrooms. So, for example, I usually might start the night before where teachers may text me, I'm going to be out, you know, and then they would report into the sub-center. And so every morning we pull a report. So I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I would look at the report, and they'll tell you if there's a sub or not. And I want to say 95% of the time there is no sub. So what do I do? If I have 7 teachers out, or if I have 5 teachers out, how do I make sure that there's a teacher in that classroom, you know, for our children, you know, to be able to get their education for that day? The other part of it that I don't think people really realize is that since there was no subs, the people that were covering the classes were the teachers, or the assistant principal, or myself, or my dean, and which meant that there was no breaks. So if you're a teacher, you start at 9:05, you know, you're done at 4:06, you get a 40-minute lunch, and if you have to use the bathroom, you usually have to ask a colleague to kind of watch your class to go use the bathroom, but that's all you get. And if you're teaching during your planning to cover for a class, there's no breaks at all. And so then what happens with your planning? Your planning has to be done at home, or it has to be done after school or before school. And it's just this ongoing cycle that becomes so exhausting.
Welcome to Robert H. Jamison, first day of school.
We're back. We thought attendance would rebound, and what we found instead was that the numbers actually looked very much like what we had seen during the shutdown period. And when I asked my student advisory committee to explain it to me, they told me 4 things that really made sense. I mean, the first is that the amount of stress that they're experiencing, they're taking mental health days. And I remember saying this to a parent who said, it's funny, I just let my kids take a mental health day last week, and I probably wouldn't have done that pre-pandemic. So we know that was a thing, right? The second was that they were still having these extra responsibilities of working or taking care of siblings and sort of thing, and that you know, Mr. Gordon, in schools, you don't understand all the other things we have to do to support our families. The third was fear. You know, our families were very afraid of these brand new vaccines that got rushed out and so weren't going to get vaccinated, and at the same time they were afraid of getting sick. And so if somebody at school got sick, I'm not coming back to school until I'm sure that that I'm not going to get sick. And so we would see these mass absences when there was a suspicion that somebody might have gotten COVID. And then the fourth, which actually I think is one of the bright sides of the pandemic, is kids really said, you got to make this worth it. We're not just going to keep playing this game. So, we were, compliant before. We would come to school and do what we're supposed to do. And, if I'm college bound, I'll take my AP classes because I'm supposed to. But you've got to really make school worth it. And so, that's really helped us to leverage the pandemic with our new learning vision. That really came from feedback in part from kids.
The one thing that I can say is that we're all survivors of the same trauma. The pandemic affected everyone. So regardless of the extent of how far or how heightened your experience was in the pandemic, we all survived it. So that is the one thing that is a commonality amongst everybody. Teachers, principals, students, other staff members, we all survive the same trauma. So that gives us a common ground to work from.
I really challenged my team to think with me about, I've quoted Audre Lorde so many times that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And we were using the tools of the system we had that was started in the 1800s, very industrialized, but that wasn't really going to change anything. And so what could we do given the fact that these systems have really been blown up, right? And so we challenged ourselves to come up with our new learning vision, which I'm really excited about because I'm seeing it come alive. It's not fully there, but come alive. That, first of all, it's about equity. We want a more fair, just, and good system of education. We know we won't solve every inequity, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try really, really hard. In our vision, we want every one of our learners, and that's both students and adults, to be individually and collectively engaged, because learning is a balance of actions and reflections, and reflecting individually is good, but reflecting collectively is better. We want our learners engaged in what we call academically complex tasks. That language is really intentional because most schools say rigorous, but if I ask 10 people the definition of rigor, they all give different ones. Kids will just tell you that means it's hard. But an academically complex task you can describe very specifically. We want those tasks to be worthy of what we call productive struggle. The learner, kids and adults, have to want to figure out the task. They should be willing to try and fail and try again. They should be willing to work in a group, maybe do a micro lesson on that math that now I need and have a purpose for, do some research. We're pretty good at creating complex tasks. We're less good at making sure they're things that are actually worth our time and energy. And then we want our learners to be able to demonstrate their learning in really authentic ways. And we want it to be fun. We want it to be a joyful and adventurous environment. And I'm really excited about that because even in the toughness of the last year, and it was a tough year, probably even harder than the shutdown period. Not probably, certainly more difficult than the shutdown period. And yet, I watched kids and adults all over the system, demonstrating learning of really complex tasks that they struggled with, and answering questions about not only their academic content, but the skills they'll take into the next project. So I had to collaborate, and collaborating meant that I had to, be willing to compromise with the partners in my team, and really explicitly bringing to life this vision of what school and learning could be compared to what it was pre-pandemic.
I think we all know when there's so much going on in our heads, the ability to learn becomes very difficult. And so ensuring that we're creating systems for students to have a voice, to express how they're feeling, allows them to reduce that anxiety so that they can learn.
We have a lot of work to do. It's not over by any means. We have a lot of more support to give. We have a lot of more issues to address so that our scholars can continue to move forward. And we can't expect for them to move forward if we don't have the supports that they need to break those barriers, to get over those bridges, to get over those humps, to, you know, smooth out those rough places so that they can matriculate through school.
We learned that when it was required of us, we could innovate very, very quickly. I hope that we don't lose that as the world seeks a sense of balance and normalcy again. There was a rising acknowledgement of long known inequities that people could not ignore and therefore had to acknowledge that we have an opportunity not to turn our back on again. So how do we really address deep poverty in this community? How do we address the digital divide that still exists? You know, things of those natures. So I think that's an opportunity. I do see educators in our district really trying these new things, and we learned to give people grace and space to have some practice space, you know, to make it safe for our adults. I hope we don't lose that, you know, because we had to say when you're learning all these tools, look, we're not evaluating you right now. Let's just figure this out. And you know, that innovation came up, but also the safety that you could try and risk and do things differently. So I think there are things that intellectually we have learned that have changed, that could change us if we are smart enough to seize them as opportunities. My fear, though, is that in our desire for normalcy, we could actually lose some of those lessons and not actually be changed in those positive ways. So we'll see.
My name is Mike McIntyre. I am the executive editor of Ideastream Public Media. That's NPR on radio. It's PBS on television. And I'm here to kind of guide a little bit of a conversation here. If we've met before, hello again. And if we've never met, you've maybe heard me on the radio but not seen me, it's okay. I thought I'd be taller too, so don't worry about it. Let me ask, are there students in the house? Can we hear from you? Like, can we get like a little whoop, a little holler, a little something? And let's hear for them. How about the students today? You guys are great. We're just going to have a couple of little conversations with some panels of folks that have really been involved in the school district, including some students in just a bit. But we're going to start by having some members of the administration and the teachers union join us. And I'd like to start with Eric Gordon, the Chief Executive Officer of Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Let's hear it for Eric. Also joining us is Ann Bingham. She's the board chair of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Ann, come on up. Roseanne Canfora is going to be joining us as well. She's with communications with the school district. Ajayi Monell is going to join us as well, principal of William Rainey Harper School. And finally, Sherry Obrensky, the Cleveland Teachers Union president, is going to join us. Now, on my program, we usually have 2 or 3 guests in an hour. Here we have 5 guests, and we're going to have just about 20 minutes. So my admonition to you all is I'd love to have your thoughts and your comments, but I'd also love it if you didn't go on for 10 minutes apiece. So a quick answer, and we'll get to it. And I've got a pretty basic and easy question, I think, for each of us to get us started off. And that is, we just saw a pretty impressive video film that showed what's happened in that time during the pandemic and since that. And I'd like to get your thoughts on the takeaways that each of you have from your very different perspectives, from the perspective of a board president, from the perspective of a teacher, from the perspective of other people, the people in the communications. But I want to start with you, Eric Gordon. You were talking about the fear that we might lose the positive things that came. And I think a lot of people don't ever talk about positive things that come from tragedy, and the pandemic was tragic. Where does your fear stand in terms of losing the things that we gained, and how do you make it so that that fear can go away and we'll be able to retain those good things?
Yeah, it's a 2-part answer, and I'll be really brief, but at a state and national level, I'm really concerned that we're going back to the way things were. In Cleveland, I'm super excited by the way that our students and our educators and our community have embraced what is possible. And you saw toward the end of it just example after example of people doing amazing things in our classrooms and in our school community. So I think we are charting a course that others are unwilling to take.
Interesting. Well, let me ask you, Ann, and it's just an open-ended question. You've seen the video and the great work that was done. I'm sure you connected with a lot of it. What is your takeaway? What really struck you the most in watching that?
Well, the first thing was how much of that I'd already forgotten. Like, we had to move. We would tackle, there would be something that would come up, we would tackle it quickly. Something else would come up, we'd tackle it quickly. I don't think we spent a lot of time gnashing our teeth about what we had done. We just had to move on to the next thing and put the other things behind us. So that's one of my first takeaways and what we've learned.
What kind of things did you forget that you were reminded of on the video?
I'd sort of forgotten about the food, that how much food we had to provide for people, that we ran buses and picked kids up and took them to schools so that they could get meals. I remembered we did some of that. I didn't remember all of that. I'd forgotten about what it was like to come back to school in hybrid, with people wearing masks, some not wearing masks, and having to worry at the board, were we gonna have enough hand sanitizer? Did we have enough masks? I'd forgotten all of that already. So we've moved past it.
We'll ask more about this in the next panel, which is going to include some students as well, but that's what struck me from watching it as an outsider, was that students who did return to the hybrid still acted as if they were at home on a computer. That, you would think, okay, well, they're the ones that are back in school, but it was a completely different paradigm. Next on our panel is that Roseanne. Hello, Roseanne. Tell us what your thoughts were watching that. What really struck you?
What struck me was recalling how COVID laid bare the digital divide. And I couldn't help but remember when I first came back to CMSD between 1977 and I came back to join the administrative team in 2009. I remember asking, why are we printing 40,000 flyers? You know, we're in the digital age. Why are we not just, you know, sending them out digitally? And being told about how many of our families did not have access to the internet or did not have digital devices and so on and so forth. You know, so how over the years we always did both. You know, principals would send things out digitally and they would pass things out too. And it just made me feel for a moment like, why was that so acceptable to me or anyone in the digital age, and why did it take a pandemic to force us to make sure that something that essential was in every household of the families and children we serve in public education?
Business is communications. Tell me about the pandemic and the role of communications. I saw in this video, you know, needing to communicate with students who were unreachable. You had to go knock on doors and find out that they moved to another school district. It just seemed that this also pointed to different strategies of communication.
Well, the other thing that, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I came to tears when watching this, because I recalled how many times we all came to tears when we went through this very sobering experience together, and starting with the moment that Eric called just a few of us into his office and basically said on a Thursday, we're going home. We all have to go home. Our staff, our students all have to go home. And our first thoughts were, what about those families that rely on us for breakfast and lunch for their children every day? And how are we going to reach everyone that needs to be reached? How are we going to deliver the services that we give that kids don't have anywhere else? And what about our families? So many of them who are going to be working on those front lines, and what about their child care? And that was the greatest communication challenge. I knew that our operations team, our academic team, you know, because I could see in their eyes their determination to put all those supports in place and do it quickly and have those meal sites ready and get that transportation together. And our challenge was, how do we let people know about it? And a very surprising thing happened. I battle with media all the time to cover the real stories. But the media that I used to battle with for a decade stepped up to the plate, and they recognized the challenge we had, and they covered us, and they made sure our families saw on TV and radio what we were doing and how to get there. And so while we were printing a lot of stuff, we were still sending things out digitally, but we used every avenue of communication we had, and we had lots of support in Cleveland. And I really think the city as a whole rose to that occasion.
Very good. I think battle is overstating it. I mean, maybe some skirmishes over the years.
That's what it looked like from your end.
Ajayi Monel, I'm really excited to talk to you because you were there. You were not in just the room where it happened, in the building where it happened. What is your thought, having seen this video, these students, that story?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ajay. It's a very interesting pronunciation.
My bad, sorry.
No worries. Watching that video took me back to that march where I remember hearing rumors of something happening and schools possibly closing. So I called my team in, had a staff meeting. I was like, okay, we want to make sure we're prepared for next week. Our kids are coming, we're not closing schools. Like, I want to make sure we're prepared. So we are talking about planning for the next week, and it was the funniest thing. It's slightly embarrassing. My staff, they still tease me about it today. As soon as I walk out and I leave the staff meeting, the announcement was made that schools were closed. So they all looked at me and they were like, Dr. Monell, did you hear the announcement? I was like, what are you talking about? I just told you we're coming to school next week. So it made me think of that. And then being in the room, as you said, it reminded me of how hard the educators in Cleveland worked during a very scary, difficult, new, and challenging time. Just thinking about how we had so many families that did not have access to devices, didn't have access to food, didn't have access to anything that you would think are just normal day-to-day things that you don't pay attention to. And how, just speaking from the perspective of my school, I'm the proud principal of William Rainey Harper School, and my team, even while we were figuring things out, and the district was trying to make sure they were doing everything safe, we were also planning, what can we do for our Harper families? We were thinking about the families that were not gonna have food. So we actually had a partnership with Panera Bread, and we still provided meals for our families. We actually had a partnership with local grocery stores, and we were able to provide meals. We did the printing of the packets. So it took me back to that space and just reminded me of how hard we really worked. And sometimes in getting over that initial hump, we forget what it all took to get where we are now. And I think we really need to just take a moment and just breathe in the success that we're seeing now because of the hard work these educators in CMSD, the administration, the teachers union, they all put in to bring us to where we are today.
I want to apologize for mispronouncing your name, and I want to say that Philip Morris gave me the correct pronunciation when I asked for it just before this, and it immediately went right out the other ear. So I apologize for that. You mentioned the hard work that the teachers and that the administrators and others did, but can you put a little perspective on the hard work that students had to do?
That is a great question, a great point. I cannot comprehend what it is to be 5 or 8 or 10 or 12, 16, and you're at home. And you're having to learn from your kitchen, from your bedroom, from your basement, your sister or sibling, they're next to you, or you're in separate rooms, and still having to master standards and create projects and present online. I am an in-person learner. Like, I need paper, pencil. I know you want us to go digital. I need paper, pencil. I like to highlight my words. So just thinking of going from that to where kids really did not have a choice, but they showed up. And sometimes they showed up sleepy, but they showed up. They showed up in their pajamas, but they showed up. They showed up eating cereal, but they showed up. And I think we need to give our scholars and our families credit for that, because it was a difficult time of wondering, how am I gonna pay my rent, but I also need to make sure my child goes to school? How am I gonna get food for my family, but they have to complete this project to present online? And I think sometimes we forget that at 5, that trauma is still there. At 10, that trauma is still there. I am an adult and that trauma is still here, dealing with that pandemic, wondering, am I going to wake up tomorrow? Is someone in my family gonna contract this virus, and are they gonna live through this? We have family members, we have scholars who lost family members during the pandemic. I don't know what that feels like to be 5 or 10 or 15 dealing with that. So I think we do need to give our scholars a huge round of applause every time we see them, because they fought each and every day to survive. And not only did they survive, they thrived. So that is a great question and something that we need to remember when we look at our young scholars as they come into our schools every day.
Sherry Obrensky, you're representing the teachers here. I saw a lot of amazing teachers in that video. Your thoughts besides pride?
So, watching the video, just for me personally, the last day that we had in-person learning on March 13th was actually the day that I got elected as the CTU president. And I was sworn in over Zoom the next month on April 16th. And so this entire thing was happening while I was the brand new leader of 4,500 incredible people who were looking to me, to our executive board, to the administration for leadership and guidance on something that none of us could really comprehend. Eric and I got really close really fast because it was, I just remember thinking, and this whole thing, it's still resonating through my head. I don't know how many times Eric and I had the conversation where it was, I just don't want to kill anybody. Like literally, I'm afraid of some of the decisions that we may have to make. We have to make sure that we don't kill anyone. And we should never have ever be in a position where that's the conversation that we're having. That's not really what you think about with a superintendent, with a teachers union leader. That's not really what that is. And so while we were doing that, everyone else, all of the building administrators and teacher leaders in the building, the staff, trying to figure out on that level how they were going to keep everything running. First with the paper packets and passing out the bagged lunches and everything else. And you had the families scrambling to figure out who was going to stay home while so many of our families had to go out and work. While so many people, there were a lot of people that were able to stay home and work from home, but our families, they were still having to go out to work because so many of them were deemed essential workers and had to figure out what they were going to do with their children. I mean, it was just an impossible situation, and yet so many people stepped up to the plate in an incredible way under impossible circumstances. And even though it wasn't perfect, they made things happen. They helped kids learn. They helped keep families fed. And we somehow managed to make our way through this horrible, impossible situation by working together. And that's really what it was. So many people working together on so many levels, doing incredible, impossible work.
I wanted to ask, go ahead. I wanted to ask about that notion of working together, because often when you're representing a union, a labor union, and you're talking to management, the ones that are trying to they're running the business, you're trying to get the best contract, that's contract time. But how about the communication that you all had and the togetherness with administration? It wasn't union against.
No, it really wasn't. We moved to a level of collaboration. I mean, we had been working hard over a number of years to get to a place where we were, where we had positive labor management relationships and we were working collaboratively together. But this was a whole new animal. We were talking to each other, not like a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting or a quarterly meeting. This was daily, hourly, every 5 minutes, depending on what it was. To Eric's credit, his team's credit, in a lot of places, administration just decided that they knew what was best and plowed ahead and didn't sit down and talk through and negotiate and work through challenges. Eric made the conscious choice from the very beginning that we were all going to work through this together, and that when it came to, for example, moving to remote learning, we got teams together, an administrative team and a CTU team, and we negotiated what that was going to look like, what the structure of the day was. I mean, it was kind of like creating a whole new mini contract when we weren't in negotiations. And oh, by the way, in the middle of a pandemic, we negotiated a contract over Zoom. We did. With the last week of our negotiations spending approximately 18 to 20 hours a day on Zoom for several days.
Eric Gordon, it seems like what I'm hearing here is that the pandemic helped you go fast. That in the past, it seems like an organization as big as the Cleveland Metropolitan School District is, in order to get things to happen, there be some inertia and some convincing of people. But we're talking about turning into hybrid learning within, or remote learning first and then hybrid within days. How does that residual stay? The idea that you can put the pedal to the metal a little bit better.
You know, I think I love the title momentum, because we had momentum up to the pandemic. We had, after a lot of work over a lot of years, we're getting better and faster at improving. And then the world just stopped, right? I mean, but as you saw in the video, it required innovation. And we were seeing not just teachers and principals, but everybody doing amazing things. And I do want to pause a moment and say we haven't named all the 2,500 non-teaching employees that made the place run, that got buildings ready, that fed us, that drove us, that did all of that. So, I mean, there was not a person in our school community that wasn't all in. And then as we've come out of it, I think we have the evidence of it. You know, the report card, when it came out, I told people before I even saw it, I can tell you what it's going to say. It's going to tell you that literacy rates got hit hard. We know that. You can't learn to read when you can't watch words being formed and you have a mask over your mouth, right? You can't learn to read when you didn't have kindergarten, right? We knew graduation rates were going to take a hit because we had kids who just went to work or stopped out of school or did all these other things. But what I also knew was that the work that our kids and our families and our educators were doing was going to address that. And I said so many times when people would say to me, learning loss, we didn't lose learning. We know how to learn. We lost a lot of time, and we got to make up for that time. So I remember my colleague in another one of our large urbans had showed me this test that we all use called the NWEA scores, and their scores were so much better than ours, and I thought, ugh, this bet of trying to really do more complex work may not pay off. It's like one of the few times I was nervous about it. And then our report card came out, and Cleveland, of the 8 large urbans, had the highest growth gains of any urban in the state and the 12th highest growth gains of any school district in the state. 12th highest. There's 612 districts in the state. We had the largest gap closing scores of any urban in the state. And so, yeah, we knew that the baseline had gotten hurt, but we also demonstrated that this momentum can carry us through. Based on the innovations and the work that our principals, our teachers, and our educators, and our kids and families, because this does not happen if kids and families don't go along and say, yep, we're going to go down this path, I'm going to bring my kid back, I'm going to support my kid. But as Sherry said, from the very beginning, it has been a community response, and that was different than what was happening around the country. And I know I was on those calls when I wasn't on with Sherry. But it's just, it is to your top question, it is the choice that we made that we can have done all of this just to get back to where we were, or we could go through all of this. And I remember Sherry and I having a conversation when we offered something called an accelerator grant, and the conversation was, we know people have done amazing things, and we don't know what they are. So we're going to ask them, and we're going to incentivize them to tell us. And so I think you're seeing the lived momentum coming out of it.
We've got 2 minutes, and I have 2 quick questions left. Dr. Monell, what kind of hope do you have that this kind of momentum that Eric Gordon is talking about is going to take hold, and that in 3 years we're going to see that momentum continuing to pay off, and in 4 years and 5 years?
For me, I think the hope is what we see each and every day. We see our scholars using technology more. Our staff members are more comfortable with technology. So as Dr. Kempfora had mentioned, you would think we would have gotten there sooner, and it wouldn't have taken a pandemic to get us there, but we're here. I have so many staff members in my building who, when they started, would contact me privately and be like, I cannot use a computer. I don't know what to do. Like, how am I going to teach my kids? And now, they're reminding me that if they find the right online school, they might leave. Like, they love online learning, so we're seeing that transition into the classroom. And I think it shouldn't have taken this for us as the adults to really get down to the level of what our kids need. But sometimes through challenges and through hard times, you learn and you grow, and that's what we've done. So my hope is that we continue. I don't want to see us going back to pre-pandemic. We don't want to fall back into the old ways because it's easy, simple, and what we're used to. We've learned so much, and I want to see us continue to do that, and that is my hope for the district, and I'm seeing it each and every day in my school.
My last question for this panel is for you, Ann Bingham. You have a leader to your right that has guided through this. You're now tasked with finding the next leader. Can you tell me a little bit about the effort to find somebody that embodies what it is the school district is hoping to have to continue the momentum.
So you saved the hardest question for last, is that what you're saying? I mean,
Sorry.
I actually think, if I can say, I think this movie is in large measure a tribute to Eric and Sherry and your teams. And I hope you take a copy of this with you because it's remarkable. We are making great progress in finding the next leader. We're starting interviews, I think, March 21st maybe is the first time that we're going to start interviewing the first round of candidates. We have a number of candidates who I haven't seen any resumes yet, but I understand that there are a lot of people who are signing up for this. All of the things that Eric said when he announced that he wouldn't be seeking the renewal of his contract, those things are all true. That the district's in a good financial place, there's good strong relations with the various unions. We're in a really good spot, and this is a place where people want to come. They want to come to Cleveland, and they want to come to CMSD. So we'll be good.
Folks, let's hear it for our panelists here. And we're going to clear you all out and bring in a whole new crew. And thank you all. Gesta Miller is here, a parent ambassador from the Cleveland School of Science and Medicine. Zaria Phillips is going to join us, a student ambassador from Garrett Morgan School of Leadership and Innovation. And New Sheikh is joining us as well, a student ambassador with John Marshall School of Engineering. All right, we gotta launch into it quickly because apparently, literally, we're going to have to leave here very shortly. So. Let me just start, if I could, with a parent, with Gesta Miller. And Eric is still with us. And by the way, if you all have something you want to filter in and say, and I haven't asked the question, Eric, just feel free to raise the microphone to your mouth and everyone else as well. How did this play? We heard about the difficulties parents had in finding places for their kids to study, much less having all of the equipment and everything else. What is your thought from somebody who's speaking for parents tonight?
Like the district, we had to be very creative, very fast. There were conversions in family rooms, living rooms, dining rooms, especially for families who had multiple children. And the dynamic was not ideal for some, but we became very creative in a short time to encourage the education of our children.
And how did you do that? What is it's one thing for a teacher this is their job, even though it's completely different, and an administrator, because this is their job. Parents' job, obviously, is looking out for their children, but how did you employ the idea that you had to turn on a dime and get your children educated?
In our family, we made the decision that one person would stay home, one person would still be employed. The basement became a home office. One of the home offices became a classroom. I filled in the gap for some of my friends who were essential workers on the front lines. I became a tutor for some families. So we really just stood in the gap to ensure that the cycle wasn't broken, because we knew as a resilient city, as a resilient district, we would come out on the right side of this.
All right. Ms. Phillips, am I pronouncing Zaria right? I work with a Zaria. Yes, oh good, okay. Same name, different spelling. Let me ask you about your experience as a student during the pandemic. We heard from some of the students there that just said, online didn't work for me, or I couldn't do it, or wouldn't do it, or just didn't feel it. How about you? How did you endure?
Well, for one, when COVID happened, I was in the 8th grade. So once we really started the school year online, that was my freshman year in high school. A lot of people had difficult experiences with it, with getting into it. But this may sound weird, but COVID was really good for me. Spending all of that time by myself, I was able to figure out who I was and see more of what I like, what it is that I can handle. Like my grandmother would say, I thrived through COVID. I really did. I struggled a lot when I was in middle school with grades and concentration, and then COVID happened, I met a new team, a new family for my school, and that was just the best thing for me. They helped me get through school, and it really motivated me to want to do more. I feel like I'm more I participate more in CMSD and the events that we hold, and especially at my school. Every basketball game, every volleyball game, I'm the loudest one in the stands if I'm not the one on the court. If I'm not the one on the court, I'm the loudest in the stands. I'm always, I can see the change in me from pre-COVID and post-COVID. I can see the difference.
And talk about the things you forget. Zaria's school, the ribbon cutting was opened with a drone on live stream and sat empty for a year after it was constructed because we couldn't go to school.
It was really a thing. All of it, I feel like my whole high school experience is really just a leap of faith, because when I was choosing my school wasn't even a building yet. It was dust. It was dust. My school didn't even have a name yet. It was called the West Side High School. I didn't know what to expect. I knew none of my friends from middle school were going to be there. It was really a fresh start for me. It was really just a huge leap of faith.
Let me ask you, does it still have that new school smell?
Yes, it does. I love it with all my heart. When it's cold outside, it's warm inside. When it's hot outside, it's cold inside. I love our gym. I love our gym with all my heart. I love it.
New Shake, let's ask a little bit about you. One of the things Zaria talked about is how she was able to grow during the pandemic, and it was actually good for her. But we heard about so many students that still haven't come back, or at least hadn't in that interim period. So clearly there's a different way that people react to this. How did it affect you?
So my story is very, it started off with how she said it was fun. Like, okay, we got the announcement of, oh wow, schools are closing, I was really excited.
Like snow day. Right?
Exactly. So, better actually. So I'm like, yo, spring break, you know what? 3 weeks of spring break, that was so good, okay? So it started off very well, everybody was happy. Oh, we're gonna get a, long break and all that. We were having fun, playing with friends, whatever. But as time went on, my family got sick, and education for me online, personally, it was just really hard. I couldn't, it was. Learning is something you learn in front of you. I'm a visual learner. I'm very much of something. If it's in front of me, I'll learn. That type of person. What should I say? So, the first semester was my parents got sick. I had to take care of them. I got very.
Are they okay?
Yeah, they're okay. Yeah. So it was just that I was too busy, helping them and stuff, and then I really couldn't focus on school. Then honestly, I'll say this: my sister, my mom, and dad, they all got sick at the same time, and I was like, you know what? Yo, what if I'm immune to this? And I was like, wow, okay. I was actually celebrating, I shouldn't say that, but I was happy that maybe I might be immune, whatever, and after they got well, I got sick, and everything just went downhill. The whole grades and everything, I remember Mr. Gordon brought up this about the valedictorian thing. It's actually my dream to be a valedictorian, and since 9th grade, I was actually number 1 in my class, and thanks to COVID, I'm kind of not anymore.
You can get there.
Yeah. Sorry. So, that's pretty much that with COVID. It's just that, many people, I feel like you said, right, people are not coming back. I feel like some people are used to staying home and they're kind of giving up on education. It's probably not the best thing for them, but, yeah.
How do you deal with that, Eric? The intransigent, the ones that just have given up, as he's just explained. You can't give up on them. So what's the answer?
I think we are going to be taking care of ourselves as a community for a very long time, and we have to still be here and be ready to support every young person, and frankly adults. Adults were fragile through this entire experience too, and we just have to stay the course and be here for them when they're ready. And that's not just CMSD, that is the adult reentry community for coming back for diplomas or degrees. It's the social service nets. It's why Say Yes is so important. We have to play the long game. And the good news is I think this is a city that's playing the long game.
Diane Downing is with Say Yes, and we heard the announcement during the film about the free college, and that got a lot of cheers and the students up and going, and that's kind of the headline about Say Yes. But a lot of the work that Say Yes does is not that. It's the support services. It's the things that help people not just get through the pandemic, but just get educated in general. Let me ask you just a little bit about that, about the importance of these wraparound services and how important they became during the pandemic.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that two of our very wonderful family support specialists were interviewed for this program. Alexandra Mora, who is at Bureau du Language, and Lakeisha Rogers, who is at Joseph Gallagher. The announcement about the scholarships happened in January of 2019. We hired our first group of family support specialists, and Alexandra and Lakeisha were in that group. They began their work that September. And we were all getting to know each other, and we had embarked on, we were in 16 schools, 10 K-8s, 6 high schools. We were getting to know each other. They were getting to know their principals and the people at the buildings, and especially the students and families. We had started after school programs as part of the wraparound services. And in March, we had to shut it all down. And we had to start meeting virtually. But they, just an incredible group of people, they jumped in. And just as it said in the documentary, they were calling students and families, they were visiting homes, they were delivering food, they were helping with computer connections, making referrals to legal aid when families faced eviction or other legal issues, getting help for mental health services, and working in conjunction with the school staff, you know, whom they had just recently met and gotten to know. So this was just critical. It was a critical part of our work, and we continued to expand during the pandemic. Our ramp up was going to be a 4-year ramp up, and I was determined. We hired 42 family support specialists virtually. All the interviews were done online that second year in 2021, and then we went to 69 total in the next year, and this year we're in all 104 CMSD schools and our partnering charter schools, because Say Yes is a two-sided coin. It is the promise of scholarships post-graduation, but just as importantly, it is support services from the time a child enters school until they graduate, so that we can remove the barriers to learning and our children and their families can thrive.
Thank you. I have a friend who's a phys ed teacher at Cleveland schools, and he said that it was a very difficult thing to teach phys ed via Zoom, and had one student who literally took their classes in a closet because they had siblings and didn't want to be sitting around where the siblings are. So you try to do jumping jacks in a closet. It doesn't really work. And it made me think about where you all were when you were getting your education. So I wanted to ask the students and mom, how did it work? What did it look like when you were going to school during the pandemic? Were you in a bedroom? Were you in the living room? I know some were in the basement office. Zaria, why don't you tell us what you think?
I was in my bedroom. I sat on my bed, and that's basically where I sat by a window. I remember that. I remember for a fact that I sat next to my window, because I have this thing where I get distracted very easily, so I used to just look out the window. But it just, I'm the only child, so it was no one else in the house. It was very quiet. Everyone knew I was at school, so it was just, all you could hear was cars driving by, birds chirping, whatever they're talking about on the computer. It wasn't much to do, much to look at. So I really just sat there and stared at the computer screen all day, and then went to sleep when it was over.
So never actually left your bed is what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
Sometimes I would be, eating something. I remember there was a time I took my computer downstairs and propped it up while I cooked me some breakfast, pancakes, eggs, bacon,
Nice.
everything. And I just propped it up. I opened it, and when she asked me a question, there you go.
That sounds like every Zoom meeting I've ever had since the last 2 years. Nuo, Sheikh, can you let us know what your thoughts are, what you looked like then?
I laugh at this. So my teachers, one of my teachers actually made a comment about this. She was like, Nu is a student who is never in one place. He's like, so every class I'm either in a kitchen, either, I don't know, doing laundry, either I'm in my room doing something, or my cat's on my keyboard, or, you know, I was everywhere at the house. I believe once I remember I was actually in my backyard taking the class out in the open. It was crazy. So.
Nice. All right, and Mom, what was it like with school and everything else going on at home?
I believe it was very important for them to get up, get dressed, and come to a place where they were not comfortable to learn. So there were no bedrooms. Most of the learning happened in the living room or the dining room, where I could see them to ensure that they were focused, they were learning, they were paying attention, they weren't staring off into space, and that cameras were on. Because I think that the interaction was very important, especially with my teenager, losing that social aspect. I'm also an only child, and I could not imagine being stuck in the house as a 16-year-old with my parents for years. So the engagement piece was very important.
We have to wrap here. We have just a little less than a minute left. I'd want to ask you, CEO Gordon, to kind of put a bow on this conversation this evening. You got 45 seconds.
So
Never tell that, guys.
In 45 seconds, I remember when we sent Nu and his chess classmates off when we were finally allowed to be out again, in masks, in a van, off to chess tournament. And one of my favorite memories still to this day is when the van got a flat tire, and the kids were all sitting outside on the side of the road on their suitcase with their masks on playing chess. So resilience, right? And then my room, I dragged a coffee table end table, which was my desk, and a wooden chair with a wall behind me so I could record all those videos, and a TV in front of me so that I could watch Governor DeWine every day at 2 o'clock. So we all had our special little rooms. I will never sit in that room again.
All right, guys, let's hear it for our students, our administrators, our parents. Thank you all for being here for Momentum, from pandemic to Cleveland's new way of learning, and have a great night.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike, for your insightful conversation. Before we do go, we want to, and Mr. Gordon says his goodbyes, we want to give Mr. Gordon a little surprise. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So please stand up. So this is your very own framed documentary poster that you can hang in the room that you'll probably never go into again. This is to honor you and everything that you have done for the district during this very, changing times and everything that has happened. So we just wanted to say thank you for all that you've done and your thoughtfulness, your kind words, your words of inspiration, and everything that you helped get us through this time, because it was a very scary time. And I know we do have to go, but I know there were a lot of times we had talked to the CEO, and the one question that I would ask him is, what do you want to say to our families and our staff, to move forward? And he would take us to church. If you guys want to see Mr. Gordon preach, he would preach that last answer on those things. And that, I know that brought me inspiration and helped me move on, and I know it did for many of our students, staff, parents. So thank you, and thanks for all you've done.
Thank you. So we do have to go. First of all, can we just give a loud applause to the Capitol Theater for welcoming us into their home? And I will end it in the way I ended so many of those videos and those stories of just how grateful I was every day and still am for our kids, our families, our educators. We got through this differently than so many communities because of the people that we are. So thank you all. Thank you, Ben, for this amazing story, which we will be submitting for an Emmy.
And we will win. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But just gratitude. We are where we are, not because of any one person, but because of every one person. So thank you and good night.